Hey everyone, my name's Matt and welcome back to Cobb Hill Farms. In today's video we're going to talk all things flail chopping. Just what is flail chopping? How does it fit into our farming operation? How did we get started flail chopping? And what does the future hold for us as far as flail chopping here on the farm? So first off, what is flail chopping? Well, flail chopping usually involves some sort of standing product, and in most cases, and in our case, it's grass. It's the process of cutting, processing, harvesting, whether it be you put it in a flat rack wagon, dump wagon, a feeder wagon of some sort, and hauling it out of the field all in one motion with the anticipation of feeding it up within the next day or so. So why do we flail chop on our farm? Well, we weren't blessed with having acres and acres and acres of just open pasture land right here on our farm. We're mostly surrounded by woods. So the fields we do have aren't in close proximity to the farm where it's justifiable to fence it in and turn the cows out to them. So essentially what we do is we go chop and then we bring the pastures to the cows. Now, just because we weren't blessed to have 30 acres of open ground here on the farm doesn't mean I don't want to take the few acres that we do have and utilize it as pasture. There's definitely benefits to having the cattle out on pasture, but there's also benefits to flail chopping as well. Back this spring, we took about this 2-acre parcel of land that's directly behind the barns here on the farm, and half of it used to be pumpkins. We used to grow pumpkins out here, and the other half was grass. Well, the part that was pumpkins, we seeded that to a grass, merged the two together, and then we decided to split half of this field and take and fence it in and make it a pasture for the cattle. Now, I'm right there with everybody else in the fact that I love driving by a farm in the heart of the summer months, seeing cattle out grazing in a lush, dark, thick green pasture of grass. There's just no sight better. There's definitely positives and negatives to grazing cattle though. It's easy. You can just open up a gate, and in our case, we whole field graze, let them out. They're out here for about a week or so, and then at the end, when we're ready to pull them off, we just pull them off and go through and let it regrow, and then in about 3-4 weeks, they come back out here. The other positive to pasture raising is the manure input is immediate to the soil. They're basically pooping where they're eating. So the soil is able to absorb the nutrients from the manure immediately. The downside is cattle are trampling probably more than they actually eat. They're also very selective in what they eat. So when you look at a field, you're going to find heavy spots where they had grazed, and it's going to be almost right down to nothing, close right down to the ground. Then there's going to be other spots in the field that they didn't even touch. So the field we're in right now, the cattle were out here about 2 weeks ago, and so this is 2 weeks of regrowth. And what you can see out here is there's spots that the grass is really tall, and then there's other spots that the grass is really not even come back much. And then you'll notice that there's also weeds out here. So to control all this, after they've grazed it and you pull them back off here, what you really need to do is come out here with some sort of mower and mow off the weeds and the tall grass and get everything all back to down to one level, and that will help rejuvenate regrowth. As opposed to this field where we started green chopping 2 weeks ago after we pulled the cattle off of the pasture, this piece has regrowed really nicely. Everything is even. There's hardly any weeds. That's the one nice thing about flail chopping, is basically you're essentially rejuvenating the field all in one motion. You're taking the field down to the proper cutting height of 2 to 3 inches to help rejuvenate that regrowth, and it's a good way of field management. The downside to flail chopping is you don't have the manure input from the cattle on the field like you do pasture raising, so you have to take that into account for your soil health. So you either have to apply man-made fertilizer, which we don't use here on the farm whatsoever, or you need to do a manure application, or in our case composted manure. So we'll spread all our manure out on our hay fields after it's been composted for a year. So that's what we do for land management on our fields that we flail chop. So what do we use here on the farm for making our green chop? We use this New Holland crop chopper number 38 flail chopper. They made this model from 1976 to 2014. That's quite the production run. So let's talk about our New Holland Model 38 flail chopper here for a minute. It's PTO driven, 540 revolutions per minute. It's a perfect fit for our New Holland 460 gas tractor, as they require 45 to 65 horsepower. Perfect fit for this tractor. On the business end of the flail chopper, it has a 72-inch cut utilizing a series of knives that are mounted to a rotating drum. So as a crop is cut, it is thrown up into this auger assembly. The auger assembly feeds the crop over to this rotating flywheel. On that flywheel, there's a series of knives. This particular model has 3 knives on it. New Holland did offer a 6-knife flywheel as well. The more knives, the more chopped up the crop is going to be. But with this 3-knife setup, the crop is chopped up, and then there's a series of paddles with each knife that, as that rotates around, throws the crop up into the chute, up to the flapper, and onto whatever's trailing behind. In our case, is a flat rack wagon. Well, now that you've seen the machinery used to do the job, let's talk about how it's fed out. On our farm, we've done 2 different methods over the years. When we first started chopping, we ended up feeding it right off one of these flat rack wagons. We had just the one barnyard that we were feeding the cattle out of, so we'd pull the wagon in, unhook it, let them eat off of it, and then when it was empty, we'd pull it out, go green chop some more, and that just kept cycling through. The one downside to doing that was you'd have to go out every day and pull what was from the center out, because the cattle couldn't reach it, and if you didn't, it would just ferment, it would turn brown and it'd smell and they wouldn't eat it. So that was the downside of feeding it off a flat rack wagon. Well then, I don't know, a couple years into it, I built the other barnyard, and we had 2 groups of cattle that we wanted to feed and green chop to. So then I decided to, well, let's still chop it onto one of these flat rack wagons, but instead let's pull it into an area that the cattle don't have access to. I pull it off with the loader and then scoop it up off the ground, and then I can respectively feed it to whatever group of cattle I want in the amounts that I want, and I feed it into a hay feeder, and that's how we do it. Ideally, it's not the most efficient or effective way of doing it. It does work, but that's not, I think, how I want to continue to do this. If green chopping is in the future of the farm, I would like to come up with a feeder type wagon, a lot pictured like the one below. But we just, we're not to that point yet. I haven't 100% decided, if this is the route we're going to go. Ideally, I'm thinking long term we're going to do a combination of a pasture and green chop program here on the farm. But for right now, this works. It's the way we do it, and I can't see you doing it any other way right now. Enough of me blabbing about how we do green chop and why we do green chop. Let's go do some green chop so you can see it in action. I think we got a little bit of a problem here. I've had a problem with this running gear before. Evidently I turned too sharp again, and the clevis has got a real long throw on it. Well, it bent. So it looks like I'm gonna have to probably find a new clevis for it. So we'll just unhook this wagon and go hook on one of the other ones and finish our job and move on. Something else to fix. Well, let's see if round number 2 goes any better than the first round did. I sure hope so. Now that we got a pile of green chop on the ground to keep them busy for us to be able to put it in for them, now is when we do their nightly grain feeding. And just like that, we got green feed for the cattle. This will last them probably 2 days or so. I don't normally like to do any more than 2 days worth of green feed, mainly because it'll start fermenting, turn brown, smell funny, and they won't eat it. So this is the process we do right on in through October into November, weather permitting. We got this wagon unloaded too. This is the one with the tow problem. We'll get that fixed. I do like using this wagon a little bit better because it has the newer rack on it. The other two flat rack wagons, their decks are getting pretty rough, so that's something on the to-do list as well, is to put new racks on those. Two things about flail chopping. You can't do it when it's wet. If you've had any kind of rain shower, really a heavy rain, and the grass itself is just saturated and wet, it doesn't work very well. You end up plugging the chopper more than anything, and you just fight that. So usually I don't chop if we've had any kind of real significant rain. You know, a morning dew or something like that, by the time you get around the chopping, it's burned off and it's not a problem. But any kind of heavy rain, I don't bother chopping. The other thing is it adds about a good half an hour to our daily or every other day routine as far as chores. Because usually what we do is the chopper will live out in the field with whatever field we're chopping. And what we'll do is hook the wagon to the 460, take the tractor and the wagon out to the field, unhook the wagon, hook the chopper up, hook the chopper to the wagon, chop a load, and then reverse order and bring the wagon load of feed back here, unload it, and by the time you get all said and done, that's added a half an hour to your chore time every other day. So it is a little more time consuming doing it this way, but in the end I feel like it's better land management for the fields, because you're doing more of a consistent cut than graze to the fields. Every square inch of that field's getting the same thing. It's not being picked over by the cattle, you know, picking and choosing what grasses they want to eat. So those are really the only two downsides I see to doing, you know, green chop, flail chopping, whatever you want to call it, on the farm. So this is just something we're going to have to weigh our options, you know, for the long-term future of the farm, and whether that's something we're going to continue to do or not. So that's some insight on flail chopping and how it's done, and at least how we do it anyways here on our farm. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you like our channel, as always, we ask you to subscribe. We hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.